All right, well, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, I guess, wherever you're dialing in from. I hope you are all enjoying Microsoft Ignite, even in this virtual experience. We're certainly very happy to be here, so thank you for joining us all. We are Veeam Software, and we have got wonderful Ask the Expert sessions today, all around Azure Backup and Recovery. So anything and everything that you want to know, need to know for now and in the future, we encourage you to use the Q&A panel and get all of your questions answered. One of the great things about these kind of Ask the Expert session is, we're not steering the conversation, it's you guys that are. So we are absolutely live and we'll be monitoring those questions. We'll be answering them both in the chat, but verbally today. So before we get started, just a couple of points on the agenda, just going through what to expect. We'll introduce you to the Veeam team that we have on the call today, all of our subject matter experts when it comes to Azure and Azure Backup, and then really spend the meat of our time with an open Q&A, making sure that we get all of your questions, comments, requests, concerns answered, and then we will wrap things up. So a couple of housekeeping rules just before we get going. The chat panel is what you use to ask the questions. You can post those anonymously or use your own name. If you see a question that you like, use the upvote thing. I think they stole that from Reddit. And then again, myself and our Veeam team members, which I'll introduce you to in a second, we'll make sure we get those answered for you. And then any resources that you might want to follow up on, we'll provide you with at the end as well. Everything is absolutely recorded, so please don't record the session. Screen sharing it on social media is prohibited at Ignite. But again, everything's recorded now, so you'll be able to watch after the fact. And then just to help us guys out, please don't spam the chat and make sure that you adhere to the Microsoft Code of Conduct. And this is my favorite bit where I get to read through all of this for you guys. I'm kidding. The Code of Conduct is also posted in the chat, so if you'd like to review that, please go through. So who have we got on the call today? Who from Veeam is on the team today? So I'm actually going to let these guys introduce themselves. My name's Sam Nichols. I'm the one that's last here. But David, how about you go first, my friend?
Thank you very much. So pleasure to be here. David Phillips. I lead the Microsoft Alliance relationship here at Veeam.
And then Mr. Rick Vanover, famous, infamous, you choose.
Yeah, a little bit of both. Cheers, everyone. Rick Vanover. I'm on the product strategy team here. I'm also a Microsoft MVP, focused on Azure, specifically Azure Storage, and been at Veeam for 11 years.
Fantastic. Then we have Ms. Corinne Bassett.
I'm also on the product strategy side as a technologist. I've been here for about almost 4 years, going on 4 years.
Wonderful. Johan Hattinger.
I am an architect looking after the Microsoft and Veeam relationship from a technical perspective. And I've joined Veeam in 2013, but then left for a little bit and came back.
You missed this too much.
I know.
Finally, myself. I'm Sam Nichols, Principal Public Cloud in our product marketing organization. So I look after our cloud native offerings, including Veeam Backup for Microsoft Azure. So that's kind of all of the pleasantries done. Let's get into the Q&A. David is going to be kind of verbally asking the questions that you post in the chat. I can't actually see them on my screen right now. I'm actually going to stop sharing the screen and we'll just kind of cut to camera to keep it as close to in person as we can. So David will make sure he asks those questions verbally, but any others, Corinne will be answering in the chat as well. So David, what kind of questions have we got coming in?
So just start with a really simple one, right? The first question I've got is, does Azure really need to be backed up, right? Fundamentally. So who wants to take that?
Cool. I'll start, and I'll definitely love to hear Corinne and Johan and anyone else's opinion. But yes, I think you should have a backup of any data you care about. And I would cite the shared responsibility model that puts the responsibility of that data really in possession, or in responsibility of the tenant. If I think about whether it's on premises, SaaS, platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service, that's consistent across the different services. And my other logic, whenever the platform changes, if you care about it, back it up, monitor it. I mean, those are a good starting point.
Absolutely. I guess I can kind of jump in as well. In my experience, what I see is some folks confuse like resiliency with replacing the need to back up, right? You know, when we look at Azure's uptime SLAs, they talk about, you know, the 5 nines of availability, and depending on, you know, different architectures that you implement, you can get differing degrees of resiliency. But resiliency is really there to help you protect against some sort of infrastructure outage. And we know that inaccessibility data isn't just because of an infrastructure outage. We know that Microsoft Azure is incredibly resilient and robust. There are a multitude of other reasons: accidental deletion, retention policy gaps, malicious insiders, malicious outsiders, ransomware, you know, kind of all threatening data. And you know, resiliency, replicating data between, you know, different availability sets or availability zones or even regional pairs doesn't really replace the need to back up. You still need that backup to protect data. Johan, anything that you would like to add there?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think one of the key things is I see some mentions of snapshots in the chat as well, is you're not just thinking about this from a perspective of I'm making a storage snapshot, now I can go back to it, but you're putting this maybe on a different medium. So Azure Blob is different than your, you know, for long-term object retention, you could put that on a different storage account than your primary data. You aren't going to do this with everything, right? The cloud is often used for DevOpsy things and is often used for things where you're provisioning workloads on demand and then destroying them on demand. But there's still things controlling that workflow. There's still data sources that are used to make this happen. You still have databases. You still have a bunch of things that have consistency. Effectively, they're stateful and they need protection. That just doesn't change.
Absolutely.
So that's a yes. No, good. I think that's a good one. And I'm going to go to the next one here. I see a correlation on this question to that one, and that this was particularly around Office 365. The question is, hey, do you need to back up Office 365? Email, Teams, SharePoint data. And I mean, I think it goes a little bit to, we just talked about that shared responsibility model, but who wants to comment here on the importance of what that, why to do that? Sam, go ahead.
My hand's up. I'll go first. I think you mentioned it perfectly well, right? The shared responsibility model. And Microsoft does a really great job at making, you know, as you transition workloads to the cloud in varying forms of as a service, you are transitioning varying degrees of responsibility. So, you know, you start off with infrastructure as a service, you're probably transferring, at least graphically from how they represent it, you know, half of the responsibility. And then you move to things like platform as a service and you transition more responsibility. And then you go to something like Office 365, which is SaaS, and you're transferring pretty much everything to them, but not everything. Like one thing always remains your responsibility, and that is the data, right? So the data that you place in Azure, whether it's IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, you know, security and protection of that data that responsibility is retained with you.
And I think that's the legal burden of that is a big deal, right? It's not just, okay, I have it in Azure. Azure and Microsoft 365 are fantastic tools. That's what we're using today. And if you think about that, it's really about getting that end-to-end story. And you're not going to be able to do some of the things you want to do when it comes to protecting these platforms without using tools that have been established in the market. There's a reason why there's so many customers using these tools already. Yes, there is the base idea that stuff will stay up. That's why it's cloud, right? But there's a lot more to that. And I think a lot of that is around consistency of protection, making sure policies are applied the right way, and making sure people at the legal side and the compliance side of the organization get what they need as well.
Good. Fantastic. Fair amount of questions coming in. And here's another one. It's a good question, right? It's basic, but hey, someone asked, Roger asked, where do the backups, where do you back up the Azure cloud to? From a Veeam perspective.
To the Azure cloud?
Yeah, anywhere you want, right? But primarily to the Azure cloud. I think, yeah, it's Mr. Rick's turn if you want to go.
Yeah, well, I mean, my base recommendation is it's not a question of is Azure resilient? It's a question of do you want control of your data? And I would recommend putting that backup of, say, I do a lot in Azure Central, for example. I might put my backups in a different Azure region. or across the hemispheres, potentially within a country. That is the layer of abstraction that I'm comfortable with for what I'm driving. But there's also the thought of, we can get into the business of, well, maybe I want to do some different type of analytics on premises, and that opens up a very interesting use case, Sam. So the thought is, especially if you think about backups that are built into any platform, right? Imagine if we had an Azure VM today, and I wanted to run it on-prem for analytics tomorrow, off of the production Azure deployment. Those are capabilities that, we've come to market and feel that there is a need for that, whether it's analytics or, forensics. I mean, you can get into the art of the possible very quickly. But the thought here is that it's control over the data. The short answer is, I would just recommend going to the next region over. You could get into the next hemisphere. It becomes domain of failure. But, if you, as watching this stream here, if you want to start simple, one of the easiest ways to do that, especially if you don't like the idea of going from central to a different region, like central to north central or something like that, simply use a different subscription. That is a very good domain of failure administrative boundary. Example, production here, subscription A, backup data here, subscription B. If you need a very simple way to start, there it is.
Yeah, I think it's a great answer to the question. Ultimately, when it comes to protecting Azure VMs, we primarily let you protect those with native snapshots. Then you can then create image-based backups off of those and store them on Azure Blob. You can do all of that across different subscriptions, different regions, and then you have the ability of doing things like backup copy jobs to an on-premises data center for the reasons that Rick listed. So ultimately, it's kind of your call how, when, and where you back it up.
Excellent. Next question. It's a bit long here, but the question is from Chris. It says, how do you get your backups if they are only in the cloud to be air-gapped? It's really to speak in case of ransomware attacks, right? So it's really talking about how do you get that protection, and does it only work with Azure native backups? Do other providers do this? So really trying to find that extra layer of protection. So who wants to begin with that one?
Since I have a strong opinion on that, so I'll start. Okay. And, this is the quest, right? Here at Veeam, I work a lot with Johan, with Sam, with David, with Rin. And every one of us in the product strategy team, we have a side hustle. And my side hustle here at Veeam is ransomware, resiliency, and education. So this question is very much near and dear to my heart. Now, the reality is air-gapped in the academic sense is actually really hard to do in the cloud. So what I would encourage you to do for now and then for later. Now, let me do the for later first, because directionally, there will be a time that we will have a very robust answer there. But for now, I recommend multiple copies, different subscriptions, different administrative domains, and then even potentially going out of band. And that becomes a little bit manual. But what I mean by that is getting creative with how you use Azure storages today, whether it's Veeam backups put from on-prem into, say, Azure Archive. That's a capability we can do today. That's really a very good logical separation. And then if you think about in Azure type of deployments or other types of use cases, again, different administrative boundaries, that's a really good way to start. But you can't take an Azure home and put it underneath your bed. That's what I'm trying to say. We're not quite there yet. Johan, anything you want to add to that?
Well, we do support Azure Stack Hub and HCI, so taking it home maybe, but no. The idea really is that we are working on some things together with Microsoft to make that story cleaner. But right now the goal is for you to keep your data isolated from, as many attack surfaces as possible. This is why you wouldn't join a Veeam server if it was on premises to the domain if you don't have to. There's a lot of things you can do to help mitigate ransomware attacks. And so having a separation of roles with, your Azure storage accounts is a really good start.
Thanks, Johan. All right, well, we've talked a little bit about, kind of what it is, why you need to do it. There's a question that comes in around the manageability of this, right? Which is, is this just another product I need to manage on top of everything I use to back up my environment, right? How does that fit into what customers are doing today and maybe a centralized management strategy?
I think it's a great question, right? Hybrid cloud is here now and it's going full speed, right? And ultimately, there's very few organizations that are 100% sole sourced on Azure, right? They're likely managing multiple environments on premises and in the cloud. And the way that you go about protecting a physical machine from a virtual machine to a cloud hosted machine are very different, right? There's different best practices to follow and different tool sets to leverage to best protect those machines. And that can introduce complexity in the form of multiple point products that you have to manage. I think the great thing about Veeam is we are as non-prescriptive as possible. So when it comes to Azure Backup and Recovery, we have a purpose-built Azure native appliance that can operate standalone in Azure and protect workloads in Azure. So those cloud first, born in the cloud organizations have something for them. But then our flagship offering, which is Veeam Backup and Replication, we just launched version 11, ultimately can operate as that common control plane to centrally manage the protection, the control of all of your data, regardless of where it lives, right? Whether that's a physical Windows box, a Hyper-V machine, or Azure VMs. That same appliance that's used as a standalone appliance in the cloud is just simply tied into Veeam Backup and Replication, could be managed there, centrally licensed there, and you have your, I'm not going to say single pane of glass, even though I just said it, but that's what you have to protect and manage everything, right?
Yeah, Sam, you hit on a good point. It may not be that single pane of glass, but it is one vendor to tackle all those services. So whether it's Azure VMs, whether it's Azure Files, Azure NetApp Files, and trivia, Johan may know, but SAP on Azure, Veeam can back that up too, right? So there's a second software as a service. But the thought is, Veeam becomes that vendor, that trusted platform. If you go to our mission here, it's to be the most trusted provider of backup solutions that deliver cloud data management. And as long as I've been at Veeam here in the 11 years, Microsoft has always been a priority. It's, it started in different areas, System Center, Hyper-V, Azure is where it's at, as well as 365, M365. So I think that you're going to find an opportunity to find that basically a business partner that's going to let you have that control of your backup data. And, this isn't really the right format for Veeam to share a roadmap because, first of all, we don't really do roadmaps. But secondly, it's a fair expectation that when we look at the services in Azure, we want to grow that. I rattled off like 4 different services that we currently back up now. If we were having this conversation at the next Ignite, I'd love to drop another and another and another. That's our journey. And you think about the data growth, the explosive data growth, and what's important to use the market. We're going to be there with you. So, the single vendorship, maybe that's the right word. I'll see if I can get an acronym made out of that.
Trademark it now. It's worth millions.
Good. So here, Johan might be responding to this, but there's a question here around, is there going to be a feature to restore SharePoint site to a different tenant?
That's the one I was actually just about to type in.
I thought you might be going to that, but I think it'd be good for a lot of people to understand some flexibility around that. So yeah.
Right. No. Today you can restore individual bits of data if you want. I think the thing with tenants in Azure is that they're very tied to your tenancy. Even if you look at the ability to rename a tenant in Azure, that's kind of a new thing that's being discussed, and there's a preview feature for that. Hit me up if you have questions later. And I think that's kind of going to be the answer for me in the long haul on this one as well. We are looking at some of these things, but not all of that is ironed out. The trick with SharePoint is that it has a very specific set of data that you would have to remap and repoint. So right now the answer is no, we don't do this today. But with all these things, you know, we are looking to the future to sort of see where that needs to go.
Good. Thanks, Johan. Yeah, I think as we continue to learn more, what are some of the needs from the customers out there, kind of help define the right things to make investments in. Here's another question came up here, which is, look, so I moved something to Azure, I created something, you know, new in Azure. Then what? Like, what's the steps and process here to protect that?
Well, I'll take a crack at that. This is actually something that I stole out of the R&D team playbook, and I'd actually recommend not necessarily for the question of what you've already done, but maybe what you do next. And I really think it's important to go into any cloud project or matter really with the cloud economic model in mind. And it's really important to do that beforehand, because after you implement, if the model doesn't match what you've implemented, it's too late. So I work backwards in that, because I really think it's important to get a good sense of, you know, you have an understanding of what said service is in the cloud, in Azure cloud, and maybe how it needs to operate, maybe how long you need to back it up or retain that data. Let me give you an example. Veeam Backup from Microsoft Azure, which is available in the marketplace for free, and you can protect up to 10 VMs today. If you have an Azure VM, one of the 10 you can back up for free, you have two very important storage policy options. Do I want to store that as a snapshot in Azure, or do I want to store it in blob? Very different cost profiles. One of the cool things that we build right into our product is if you say, for example, I want to keep 7 days as a snapshot, and I want to keep 7 years as blob storage, it'll give you a cost estimate. Conversely, if I wanted to keep 7 years as a snapshot, it'll give you a cost estimate. And trust me, you're going to see some very interesting differences. So I would encourage you to go into any of these with a cloud economic model. But once you have data you care about, once it's production, you want to start thinking about making sure it's, you know, under your control, in case you accidentally delete it, in case you try this new script and get a parameter wrong and delete things good. But always go in with a cloud economic model.
Okay.
I think one of the great things about this policy-based automation approach, not only from a snapshot backup lifecycle management perspective, is you can create these policies, and these you can base policies based on subscriptions, or you can use them based on tags. And if you implement a proper subscription-based approach or a proper tag-based approach, as you have these machines coming online and offline, they can just automatically be brought into those policies ultimately without you having to do anything. So we see a number of customers implementing things like gold, silver, and bronze tiers, and different recovery point objectives and storage approaches for these different tiers. And as these machines come online, you tag it with a gold, silver, or bronze, and ultimately it just gets pulled into that policy automatically.
Okay. Good. All right, let's go to our next question here. Another anonymous question. Here, can I just use something like an agent? Is a question, right? People are familiar with agents, so that's a question here. What's the answer on that?
Well, I'll start, because I really got a recent story that I want to share. I just spoke to a financial services org who actually intentionally have around, I want to say 20% of their in Azure deployment being backed up with a Veeam agent for Windows and Linux for their Azure VMs. And then the other 80% or so with Veeam Backup for Azure. Now, that was intentional because they wanted different levels of manageability, different types of recovery, application consistency, which we've actually since updated. I want to check with them and see if they're still doing it. That actually is really flexible due to a construct we have in place called the Veeam Universal License. The thought here is that if you have a server right here, a virtual machine over here, or an Azure VM up there, it's one item. We can consume it universally. So that is an option. And I know a lot of organizations that are doing that, either partially, like that 80/20 example, or one organization I know is doing it completely for thousands of virtual machines. So Veeam your way, any way you want. I don't know, Johan, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think you've summarized it beautifully. I think the trick really is that sometimes you need some of those agent-based features, right, for those specific applications on those machines where you want to have really granular control. And the agents do that very well.
Perfect. All right. Thanks for the commentary on that. Let's get to the next. Look, I think it's good to define these sometimes, right? So the question is, look, what do you really mean by cloud native? What is that really? I sometimes it's good to kind of make sure we're clear on the definition.
You just started another 2-hour conversation.
Yeah. Johan, you want to take that?
Sure. So cloud native could mean a Kubernetes cloud native app where you're working on building something that's one step before serverless, if you will. Or we could talk about the things that are in the hyperscaler, which is much more than just those resources. You have everything that is managed as an ARM resource that needs protecting in some way, whether that's config or individual virtual machines or the PaaS and SaaS applications. But I guess I think cloud native to me means anything that's in that data center that's not yours, that follows best practices, and it's kind of aspirational. I think it is an aspirational term. So it's everything that you're working towards doing with the cloud, but in Azure in this case, right?
And Johan, you hit a very good point, the aspirational, the visionary bit. If you as an IT pro, your organization, you have a roadmap. We are working on this and that. And let's suppose that AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service, is part of the plan. If you were going down that route, just so you know, Veeam is there with you too. In October, we acquired a company, Kasten, where now you can actually, right now today, back up AKS clusters with Kasten by Veeam. So if you go down that path, Veeam's there with you for sure. So I guess that's another Azure service we back up.
That's good. All right. Next question is around snapshots. It says, what about snapshots in the Azure console or scripts? Does someone know how to decipher that question? Well, Sam, you raise your eyebrows. Is that?
Sure. I think I know what they're saying. Ultimately, I see a number of folks just kind of relying on snapshots as their kind of single data protection strategy. And snapshots are great for things like low recovery point objectives, low recovery time objectives, but I don't believe snapshots to be the be-all end-all when it comes to data protection. I think they represent a single point of failure. They're not independent of the disks that they're protecting. And ultimately, where it comes in is, yes, utilize snapshots for for the items that need those very, very low recovery point objectives, recovery time objectives, and after a period of time, create those image-based backups that you can store independently on alternate storage service like hot or cool Azure Blob tiers, to really kind of build a more robust backup plan, but then also ties into what Rick was talking about around cost efficiencies, right? Azure Blob is less than half the cost of the Azure disks that those snapshots are stored on. So if you need to keep anything for, really any period of time in excess of a month, it probably serves you best to start tiering those snapshots off onto Azure Blob.
Well, go sideways here, Sam. Granted, in IT, I'm an old guy, look at my hair. I have nothing but evidence in the form of case studies at Veeam.com that bad things happen to good data. Okay, so let's take this, our snapshots enough bit. Heaven forbid, what's the whole nature of the cloud? It's build up and tear down. The moment somebody destroys your storage account with your snapshots, it's game over. So the thought of having an actual independent backup, and I recommend on a different subscription, potentially even on Blob for that longer retention, lower cost, you have an incredible level of resiliency right there. And whether you're talking about your camera, my home PC, or your Azure VM, I really think everyone should take this logic of the 3-2-1 rule, having 3 different copies of your data on 2 different media, one of which is offsite. This can translate to the cloud very well. It can prescribe nearly any failure scenario, and it doesn't require any specific technology. Couple that with the incredible flexibility of Azure, you're in good shape.
Absolutely. So I think we only have like sub 1 minute left. So I do want to say thank you to everyone for all of your questions today. We've got a little thank you screen here. So appreciate your time with us. There's a survey that comes out to comment on how we did. You can connect with us at our feature partner page at the Ignite online conference. So if you'd like to request a meeting, check out any of the content, head there. Rick mentioned it earlier, if you want to just get hands-on in the Azure Marketplace, we've got free Azure Backup and Recovery for 10 VMs. And I think that puts us right on time, and you're able to return to the event right now.